Shalom.
So I don't need to introduce Moshe, Bogie, Yaalon. They've all heard about you. And I'm going to turn it over to you for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation and Q&A. It's a great pleasure and honor to host you. Thank you, Bogie.
Shalom and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have read about your CV. I don't know who is who, but I know about you, and I'm very glad to be here and to try to share with you my experience as Israeli citizen, as a paratrooper, special forces officer, commander, of course, of the IDF at the time, as a politician, as a defense minister, talking about our strategic situation. I was born in the state of Israel 2 years after the creation of the state, 1950, 2 years after our independence war of 1948. My mother arrived to the land of Israel as a Holocaust survivor in 1946. She was illegal immigrant according to the British mandate rules, and he succeeded to enter to the country. She met my father. We got married within a year, 1947. She was the only one from her family to survive the Holocaust in Poland. Actually, Galicia, it is today in Ukraine. My father arrived to the land of Israel in 1925 with my grandparents, who decided to leave everything in Ukraine. They left just right on time. 97 years ago, they decided to leave Ukraine after losing one of the sons, my uncle. He was murdered because he was Jewish as a student, 18 years old, on the way back from the Polytechnicum to the village on the Dnieper, the river. Another uncle was arrested because of Zionist activities, and he got an ultimatum to leave the country within 3 days, otherwise to be arrested or to go to Siberia. He left the country in 1923, and within 2 years, my grandparents left Ukraine to Jerusalem, to Zion, as we call it. Zionism is Zion. For my wife's side, we can go back to 1899. Her grandparents decided to leave Morocco to Zion, to Jerusalem. It took them 2 years to reach Jerusalem. For my wife's grandmother's side, we can go back to the end of the 15th century in Europe, the time of the Inquisition. They moved to Bukhara. At the beginning of the 16th century, they reached the holy city of Tzfat in the Galilee to live there since the 16th century. With this background, and I believe that you can hear many stories about family history in our country, I believe that the Jewish state all over the world, the Jewish people all over the world should have at least one independent Jewish state, not more than that, and this is the state of Israel. Having said that, and if I have to, in a nutshell, to try to describe what is our still strategic challenge, it is still the reluctance of too many parties in the Middle East. We are fortunate to have less and less such parties who are not ready to recognize our right to exist as a Jewish state. We don't share any border with Iran whatsoever. We don't occupy any Iranian land, but the Iranian regime claims to wipe Israel off the map of the earth, and they try to implement it by using Hezbollah as proxy, Shia militias from Syria as proxies, supporting Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian arena, especially from the Gaza Strip, and to acquire military and nuclear capability in order to be able to intensify their activities against us. And even talking about the Palestinians, but I believe that we will elaborate about it. If I have to try to identify and to explain what is between us and the Palestinians, it is still their reluctance. Not just Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Talking about the Fatah, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, led by Arafat, and then by Abu Mazen, to recognize our right to exist as a Jewish state. It is about our very existence. Otherwise, we would have achieved any kind of territorial compromise based on Oslo and all the experiments after Oslo. Nevertheless, when we talk about the strategic situation in the Middle East, I believe that we live in an era, especially in the last decade or so, in which the Middle East is engaged in the most significant crisis since the days of Muhammad in the 7th century. It was called the Arab Spring. There are those who claim it is Islamic winter. I would like to talk about it. What we have witnessed since 2010, 11 is the collapse of the artificial nation states in our region. Whether it was in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. What does it mean, artificial nation states? The monarchies survive. The nation states have been collapsed. And I claim that it is one of the Western world mistakes, which should be understood in order to avoid further mistakes regarding the Middle East. Actually, immediately after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, World War I, Sykes-Picot agreements claimed to bring to the Middle East the European system. As in Europe, all the feudals whatsoever in the medieval age had become states. France, Great Britain, Germany, Italy, you name it. The idea was to impose the European system to the Middle East. It was successful in Europe. Why not to try to make it in the Middle East? And there is a description of the Secretary of Colonies in the British government, namely Winston Churchill, sitting on a veranda in London, 1921, illustrating the borders of the new nation states in the Middle East. Actually, as a result of dividing the land of the Middle East, the territory, between the British mandate, the French mandate, the Italian influence regarding Libya and so forth. But when he illustrated the borders, like in Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom, you can see the Jordanian map in which we have straight lines from the west to the east. Very straight lines, ignoring tribes, ignoring demography, ignoring geography as well. Very straight lines. Why? In the middle of this piece of territory of the Hashemite kingdom is a pipeline, the oil pipeline, IPC, Iraqi Petroleum Company pipeline. And when Churchill asked his security experts what trend should have been to protect, to defend the pipeline, this is the map. Of course, it is an artificial, but the monarchy survived. But when it comes to Syria as an example, you can ask a Syrian guy, what is your national identity? There is no Syrian national identity. He might be Alawite, he might be Muslim, Sunni, he might be Christian, might be Druze, he might be Kurd. there is no Syrian national identity. So when the Europeans decided to make Iraq as a solid nation state, ignoring the fact that there were Shias, Sunnis, Yazidis, Kurds, and so forth, Christians, whatever, they survived when they have tyrannical regime like Saddam Hussein to keep them. But when Saddam Hussein was toppled, it was the end of Iraq as a solid country. And this is the case today, of course, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in a way in Lebanon. And instability had become the most stabilized element, character of the Middle East. It's not going to be ended by any kind of stability. Forget about it. Now, at the time, the main powers in the Middle East were colonial powers. Brits, French, Italian. Later on, during the Cold War, the struggle and conflict between the United States, the Soviet Union at the time, their influence. Nowadays, most of those elements try to disengage from the Middle East, to exclude Russia in Syria, to exclude some involvement in Libya. But generally speaking, the main struggle in the Middle East about hegemony is between internal powers, mostly Islamic movements. First of all, the Iranian Shia regime, claiming for hegemony, trying to export the revolution, as they call it, to have influence in Lebanon like they have, with Hezbollah as a proxy. In Syria, the Shia militias that we fight today, the presence in Syria. In Yemen, vis-a-vis the Houthis. In Iraq, trying to have a puppet government, Shia one in Baghdad, not a successful step. And they are even trying to have influence in North Africa by supporting, financing, arming certain elements to challenge Morocco. Not talking about undermining the regime, the Sunni regimes, like in Saudi Arabia, attacking them using the Houthis as proxy by missiles, unmanned air vehicles. In Bahrain, the Shia majority in Bahrain is supported by Iran, certain activities against the regime, and of course, in some other countries in the region. Of course, they support Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad from the Gaza Strip. They are Sunnis, but they prefer to support them because they are able to challenge us, providing them the know-how, technologies to manufacture rockets, unmanned air vehicles, drones, and so forth. This is the Iranian regime. They claim for hegemony in the Middle East and beyond. It is unbelievable, but they claim to have a Shia world, not just Shia Middle East. Then we have the jihadists claiming to have a Sunni caliphate. This is ISIS, Daesh. It was IS for a while. ISIS as an organization, as an ideology, as a movement. Al-Qaeda, some other elements claiming for hegemony in the region. And the third Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood. Internal challenge in Egypt as an example, in other countries in the region. And generally speaking, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East is a member of NATO, Erdogan of Turkey. So we have three Islamic movements: the Iranian Shia movement, the jihadist, the Sunni jihadist, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, Erdogan supports Hamas in the Palestinian arena. He tried to support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And when we talk about the situation, we, Israel today, and the Sunni Arab regimes are on the same side, on the same boat. This is Abraham Accords. It didn't start by the Accords. It's a long process in which the Sunni Arab regimes, whether in the Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, North African countries, other countries in Africa, might be Sudan, might be later on Saudi Arabia. We are on the same boat. First of all, we share common enemies. Iran, for them, is the main enemy. The Shia influence, the Shia activities against the regimes. We are on the same side. We are on the same side regarding jihadists. Whether it is the ISIS county in Egypt, in Sinai Peninsula, challenging the regime. ISIS element in Jordan, in other countries, we are on the same side. Although, not to forget that certain regimes used ISIS elements as proxies against the Shias in Iraq and in other places, and not to forget 9/11, which was perpetrated by Saudi Arabian Sunni jihadists. That's, of course, the second common enemy, and the third one is a rival, Erdogan. They don't want to see a neo-Ottoman empire led and consist of Muslim Brotherhood ideology. We are on the same side, but it's not just common enemies. Their leaders, whether it is in Riyadh or in the Emirates, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, in Manama, in Bahrain, in Rabat, in Morocco, they understood that the oil is not anymore this precious assets, economic or political asset like it was in the 70s. Now we have some change because what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, but nevertheless, it is not anymore, and they understood that in order to enjoy prosperous economy, they should move to high-tech, and Israel can be partner. And when we are talking about exploitation of water, Israel has expertise, desalinating water, recycling water for agriculture, and of course, sophisticated agriculture in the desert. We are experienced. So we have common interests on many fields, not just common enemies, and the result is Abraham Accords. For us, generally speaking, I claim that there is no Israeli-Arab conflict anymore. There is an Israeli-Palestinian one. We'll talk about it probably during the question and answers. And generally speaking, regarding Israel, our first prime minister, the founder of the state, David Ben-Gurion, said that Zionist who doesn't believe in miracles is not realistic. It's a miracle. Against all odds, with all the Arab coalitions against us, fighting them in the Independence War, in the Six-Day War, in Yom Kippur War, in the Attrition War, we have a prosperous country, not to compare to any country in the region, but I can tell you that we have a well-known secret. And our well-known secret is our spirit, the Jewish Zionist spirit, which motivates us, whether it is because we are experienced of 2,000 years in exile and we are happy to have an independent state, and a knowledge. And the motivation brings about excellence in knowledge, to enjoy state-of-the-art in technology, and we can overcome our inferiority when it comes to quantity, to superiority when it comes to excellence. to knowledge. And everything here is based on high-tech knowledge, whether it is our prosperous economy, which is based on knowledge, startup nation, whatever. In the military, enjoying technologies adopted to operational capabilities in order to overcome these inferiorities when it comes to quantities. They have more planes, they have more aircraft, they have more tanks, more artillery guns, more rockets, more missiles, more fighters, terrorists, or military personnel. They have more, but they're not able to defeat us because of this advantage. And when it comes to water again, in 1966, we fought the Syrians not to be able to divert our sources of drinking water to the Sea of Galilee. One of the sources of the Sea of Galilee is the Banias, which was before 1967 in the Syrian side, and they tried to divert it, not to allow the water of the Banias, one of the rivers, one of three rivers, filling the Sea of Galilee, to their side. And we didn't allow it. Today, we have sufficient water to supply 100 million cubic meters of water to Jordan. They are dependent on us, to the Palestinians in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, and of course, to share our knowledge with Egypt, which is fighting now about the water, on the waters of the Nile, with Ethiopia, with the dam, and so forth. So this is our well-known secret. And as long as we educate our young generation to be highly motivated with Jewish and Zionist values, to enjoy the state-of-the-art knowledge, our future is bright. Anyway, and we are now engaged in a very unique situation, and I can't ignore it. Of course, we perceive the United States and the US-Israeli relationship as a cornerstone of our national security. And nowadays, we witnessed and we worry about the situation in which Russia is trying to challenge the Western world, the free world, the US. And what we witness now in Ukraine is an historic event in which, to my mind, Vladimir Putin should be defeated. And if someone is thinking about sacrificing Ukraine to enjoy a calm situation for a while, we are going to witness escalation, deterioration in the US strategic posture, the Western world strengths, Europe. If someone is thinking about sacrificing Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine, Europe will witness a very dark future. So in this short statement about it, I would have said that Israel and the US are on the same side, with all reservations and disputes about the Iranian nuclear deal or whatever. No doubt that we are on the same side. I claim that the United States has a very big aircraft carrier, which is called USS Israel, starting from Metula, ending in Eilat. And this USS Israel is not sailing, is here, providing very high quality intelligence information, sharing know-how, not asking the United States to fight for us, to have American boots on the ground to fight for us. We know how to do it. And we enjoy the benefit of being partner of what I consider the most important superpower, still, with all the Chinese challenges, the Russian challenges, sharing the same values as democracies, sharing very common interests in the Middle East. And I hope that we'll be able, and you as well as officers in the US Armed Forces, will be able to elaborate, enhance the relationship for the benefit of our two countries, our two people. Thank you.